Hello and welcome to week 9. So this week we are talking about the Severan dynasty. And the Severans are going to be the successors to the Antonines, who we talked about last time. And they're significant for a few reasons. The first is that we are seeing a return to blood family succession. So for a long time prior to this, we saw succession based on adopting, yes, but it was not blood relatives who they were adopting. They were kind of merit-based adoptions, and we start to see that break down a little bit in the Antonine dynasty. But in the Five Good Emperors, we especially see this sort of merit-based succession. And with the Severans, we're going to go back to a sort of Julio-Claudian blood family succession, in that it really is a family dynasty. So that's a big change that we see. Something else that we see is a sort of separation between the royal family and the rest of society, the rest of government. They're really going to elevate themselves into a status that separates them from the rest, that they really want to mark themselves as something special as this royal family. However, though, they will be very closely tied to the military. This is a very violent military kind of based time in Roman history, and keeping the military happy is going to be very, very important for these rulers and for their success. And so we see a sort of heightening in the power of the military and the amount of control that they have over the government of Rome, the governing of Rome. The last is that if we look at sort of the artwork, on the artwork side, we start to see a continual shift away from more classical norms and toward more abstracted, flat frontal art, which is really characteristic of late antique art, which we're not quite at, but we're seeing a very serious shift in that direction. So just a few things to kind of look out for as we talk about the Severans, and as we kind of move into this last part of Rome. Here we are in the 3rd century. So kind of moving into that last part of Rome and starting to see changes in both the governing structure and also the artwork. So just to recap where we are, we've made it through all of these different periods of time now, and we are at the Severans, and so you'll see that that's sort of the end of the 2nd century and the first third of the 3rd century, so after the Antonines, and then we still have a few more to go. So I do want to end, though, begin at where we ended last time with the Antonines. So we were talking about Commodus, who was the last of the Antonines. He was the son of Marcus Aurelius. He was the biological son of Marcus Aurelius. And as we've discussed, that doesn't always go well when you just pick your son. So Commodus, not a great leader, sort of a Nero or Domitian figure, in that he was very arrogant and sort of had a party focus, really loved Hercules and wanted to dress up and do all these things. So Commodus is going to reign for 12 years, but be assassinated on New Year's Eve, 192, so December 31st, 192 CE, and this is going to kick off the year of 5 emperors. And we had something similar a while back after the death of Nero, where it was sort of thrust into this civil war, where we're not sure, we don't have a good plan in place of who's supposed to rule, especially because we didn't like the last ruler, so we don't want someone connected with them. So we're going to see a similar thing in 193, the year of the 5 emperors. And here are 4 of them. So it starts with Pertinax. Pertinax is, well, I should go back a little bit. So Commodus is assassinated by people very close to him, his mistress and a few of his servants, who feared that he was actually going to execute them on January 1st, 193. So before he could do that, they assassinate him. And the conspirators elect or sort of turn over the reins to Pertinax, who is kind of a successful consul, general, someone who's been in the military, been in politics for a while, so kind of an insider. So Pertinax, we see, only ruled for 3 months, January through March. He's killed by the Praetorian Guard, who is that kind of elite force that's really closely connected to the emperor, kind of like the Secret Service, the people right there. And so if you're the emperor and they don't like you, your life's in danger. Let me just say that. When Pertinax is killed, these Praetorian Guard, these soldiers, as I was saying, the military has a lot of power at this time, and so it's kind of up to the military to choose their next ruler, because they were the ones to take the last ruler out of power. And so what the Praetorian Guard does, and the rest of the military, is that they auction off the role of emperor. They basically give it to the highest bidder. They say, whoever's going to promise us the most money can be the emperor. Problematic for a couple of reasons. First of all, bribery, but also that they're really picking someone who they know is going to support them financially and is kind of going to be beholden to their interests, because they're the ones who place them in power. So Didius Julianus is the top bidder. So he is elected emperor by the troops for basically just paying them the most money. His reign also doesn't last very long, perhaps unsurprisingly, because, you know, of this kind of way that he took power. And so because of that, 3 generals are actually going to take the role of emperor. So Didius Julianus, it's kind of a tricky time where it's like we don't even really know who is emperor because so many different people are declaring themselves emperor. So Didius Julianus is killed, and we have 3 generals who are each declared emperor by their troops. So we almost have 3 people ruling the Roman Empire at this point. And those are the 2 men that you see on the screen there, Niger and Albinus, who their names kind of translate to black and white, actually. But Niger and Albinus are both military generals, both with very loyal troops, and they are going to be elected, as well as a 3rd man, Septimius Severus. And so Septimius Severus, the 2 men that you see here, are going to kind of co-rule, but they're not super in alliance. They're not really happy about all ruling together. It kind of goes back and forth between whether they like each other or not. But eventually what's going to happen is that Septimius Severus, the 3rd ruler, or the 3rd general, is going to defeat the 2 others in battle. So he is the ultimate victor in this civil war, and he's going to take power and maintain power and create this dynasty with his family. Septimius Severus, 193 to 211 is going to be his reign, but he actually co-rules with one of his sons for about 13 years. And so he's kind of the main one in power, but he's technically sharing the role with Caracalla, who is his oldest son, who we'll talk a little bit more about later on. But Septimius Severus, so he's the first African ruler. He's the first emperor from the continent of Africa. He was born in Leptis Magna, which is in modern-day Libya, so North Africa, similar to a couple other emperors that we've seen, like Hadrian or Trajan, who were from Spain. We have an emperor from the provinces, and this time he's from North Africa. His wife is Julia Domna, who is a daughter of a priest of Elagabal in Syria. So she is Syrian. She is also not from Rome. She is also from the provinces. And she is sort of seen as a little bit exotic in the eyes of the Romans because she is connected a little bit more to this Eastern cult. Elagabal is a deity in sort of Eastern Roman religion, and so she's the daughter of a priest of that deity, and so therefore sort of connected more to the East and sort of has more of this devotion to that cult rather than the traditional Roman gods. So what we see in this couple is, again, a sort of exporting of the throne to the provinces. As I said, they have 2 sons, Geta and Caracalla, and we'll see a lot that the family is depicted together. That's very important, this idea of family, the idea of dynasty, and we'll see that the 4 of them are often depicted together. A couple of other notes about Septimius just as a ruler. So his rule is very military focused because he was a military general. That is his background, so he is a soldier at his core. He's going to be involved in some foreign wars, most notably invasions of the Parthian Empire, Britain, as well as in Africa, and we'll see this depicted on his artwork as well. And he's also notable because he is the only 3rd century emperor to die peacefully. So he's going to be the only one who does not die in an assassination or some kind of murder. He is the only one who dies peacefully in his bed. And so you can just see what that means for the 3rd century, that we are really going into a time of turmoil, especially when it comes to the highest office in Rome. So Septimius Severus, kind of the beginning of this new age. The last thing I want to note about him before we talk about his portraits is that you'll notice that his monuments that he builds and his propaganda that he promotes really does focus on legitimizing his reign. Because it was taken after a civil war, it was taken in a non-traditional way, he really needs to legitimize himself. And so he'll do things in his propaganda, in his artwork, to declare himself a ruler, to make people okay with the fact that he is ruling, and to kind of accept him as an emperor so that he is not assassinated. But if we do look at his portraits, We see it actually a bit of a change over time. So in the beginning, we see kind of a more Antonine focused portraiture style. So we see curly hair, we see a short parted beard, similar to the one that Septimius had. And so Septimius, as I said, is kind of trying to legitimize himself. He's kind of trying to connect himself to the Antonines, even though people weren't huge fans of Commodus. People liked Marcus Aurelius and the other Antonines, you know, the 5 good emperors. So he's going to do things in his portraiture in the beginning, like we see here, you know, this is from around 195, kind of the beginning of his reign, where he looks a little bit more Antonine. And as I said, sort of the style, the way that he styles himself in like his beard and his hair, but then also the style of portraiture as well. However, if we go later on, we see a little bit more of a change in his styling, in that he begins to really connect himself to Serapis. Serapis is that Egyptian or Greco-Egyptian god who we've talked a lot about. And the worship of Serapis has really expanded in the time since Hadrian and sort of become an empire-wide worship. So the imperial family actually visits the sanctuary of Serapis in Egypt, you know, that one that we've talked about that Hadrian kind of built a model of in his villa. And we see Severus's portraiture start to change after that trip. We start to see him looking a little bit more like Serapis. And so the way that he does that is that his beard kind of adopts these corkscrews. So you can see in the bust of Serapis, these kind of curly cues, these swirls in the beard on Serapis. And we start to see that not to as great of an extent here, but similar sort of curls in the way that the beard looks, and then also most notably though in his forehead. So he has these really perfect curls that come down his forehead, and you might remember that we've talked about that with our Fayum portrait when we talked about these, that priests of Serapis would have those curls, and it's either 3 or 4 curls, but they're very distinct going down onto a man's forehead. And so we see that here in the portrait of Septimius Severus from the Louvre, where he has these curls on his forehead, as well as the very corkscrew hair, very curly hair. So we see him connecting himself a little bit more to Serapis. We also see, as we've talked about, carved pupils. So that's a bit of a development that, although this all would have still been painted, that they've been able to perfect the technique of drilling eyes, so that you can actually carve the pupils. And actually just the rest of it too, the hair and the beard is going to be much more deeply carved and drilled than earlier emperors. So as I said, we see a bit of a change over his rule in his depictions. As for his wife, Julia Domna, she also changes a bit over the rule, but she's really characterized by this hairstyle that you see. So it's a very round kind of bowl on her head in a way, very rounded around her face, and then it has these plaits that go back kind of like that, as you can see. And so you see in both of these, between even 193 or 200, a very similar style, and she's also very individualized. So her face, though her facial features look similar across portraits. And you'll notice also that we see the eyes pointing up. We see that in a bit in Severus's portrait as well. His eyes are looking upward. And that's going to be a sign, which maybe I've mentioned before, of piety. You're sort of looking up to the heavens. So it's a sign that you're kind of paying homage to the gods, that you're focused on the heavens, on the deities above. So sort of a sign of reverence. But yes, Julia Domna, going to be always recognizable by that hairstyle. We do see her portraiture change a little bit, though. There is some variation, not necessarily over the reign, but kind of just at different times. And that sometimes it's going to be that really round cut around her face, a round style around her face. And other times it's kind of the same thing, but it just droops. So it's almost like if it's like this, it just kind of droops down. And these braids more frame her face going down. And so we see that in her portrait here, as Ceres, who is kind of the goddess of the harvest of grain. This was a pretty common goddess for women, especially imperial women, to adopt the guise of in their portraiture. And so we see her here in the way that she's holding those branches, and then she has the veil over her head, right? So another sign of piety. And then this hairstyle is a little bit different, and then it's going to be a little bit more drooped, but her facial features still look fairly similar. She still kind of looks a little bit the same, although her features do look a little bit rounded here, which perhaps mimics the the other styles that we'll see in relief carving and painting. We'll talk about that later on. But yes, this is Julia Domna. You might see her in both kind of styles. I said, though, a lot of times we do see them as a family together. So we see the two boys and their parents pictured together. So this is a very famous portrait of them from Egypt around 200. And you'll notice that it also looks similar to the Fayum portraits. So we're really seeing a similar attempt at portraiture in a more abstracted way. And you'll notice that these are both tempera on wood. So the same materials, the same painting, which may contribute to the style. But we see these really rounded eyes, very round, almost bulging eyes like we saw at the Fayum portraits, and just overall a sort of flatness to it. So there's not a lot of depth here. It's not like if you remember the other Fayum portrait that I contrasted with this, where there's really dark shadows that create depth and create a lot of dimension. It feels a lot more flat here. There is an attempt at making some shadows, as you can see, and sort of delineating where they are against the backdrop, but there's not also a very defined backdrop. They're kind of floating in space, and overall just feels quite flat. And then we have these very exaggerated facial features, especially in the eyes. And then we also see them depicted very royally. So we see them all decked out. They're wearing these sort of crowns or diadems. They have this more lavish robes on. Julia Domna has jewelry on. And so we see them looking very elite here. This is a very elite portrait in what they are wearing, but a bit more abstracted and frontal in the way that they're depicted just in terms of the artwork. So this is kind of a change away from the classical. We're not seeing the same naturalism or even idealization that we are. It's a bit harder to talk about idealization when you see something like this. And so this is going to kind of signal the beginning of late antique art and some conventions that we'll see moving forward. Anything else? Yes, and then you'll also notice that there is some damage to this piece, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I want to move to Leptis Magna. So this is Septimius's hometown. This is where he was born, where he grew up, and we see him kind of redo the city, renovate it once he becomes emperor, which kind of makes sense. You know, he wants to shore up the place that he came from, make it a little bit nicer now that he really has the resources to do so. So he's going to return to Africa and build a lot of things there. And you'll kind of see on here, you know, you can see old Forum, old Basilica versus Severan Forum. So they kind of try to distinguish. So Leptis Magna is in Libya. So as you can see, it sits on the coast of the Mediterranean in North Africa. And we've talked about a couple other sites. You know, there's Carthage, Egypt is over here. So it's kind of in the middle of North Africa, but also on the coast. So a big trading center, you know, became wealthy from that as well. Big harbor town. You can see the harbor on the screen there. It's quite exaggerated. And then the town kind of sits right next to that. We see large colonnaded streets, characteristic of province urban planning. So especially this one here, this was sort of the main road that led into the city from the harbor. And you can see that it's very colonnaded, very long and straight. And you can see that right there as well. And it's going to lead right into the city. You can also see that the harbor would have had a lighthouse. So it would have been probably a stepped lighthouse like we see at Alexandria or other parts of more the Eastern Empire. You see this lighthouse here. Not much exists of it today, just the base, but we kind of know it was on this outcropping. So probably looked fairly similar to this other stepped lighthouses that we've seen. We also see a few temples in the harbor area, one of which has an inscription that dedicates it to Jupiter, but also to the Severan family and to the victory and the return of the Severans. And so we see that again as kind of something that we see a lot in provincial temples, the kind of more openness about worshiping the imperial family in a temple in their lifetime. So if we are at this harbor, and as I said, there's this long colonnaded street, we're going to kind of follow the colonnaded street into the Severan Forum, which you can see is number 16 on the map. So we've talked a lot about how the main streets often lead into the Forum, and so that's what we're seeing here. So we're going to follow that colonnaded street into the forum. This is the Severan Forum in Leptis Magna. So it is a brand new forum that the Severans built, that Septimius had built. And it looks fairly similar to the Forum of Trajan in Rome. So the fact that we have a large basilica that is double apsed, so it has an apse here and an apse at the end. So it's a double apsed basilica, and then it has this very large open space, sort of a large rectangular courtyard in a way. Probably had a statue in the middle, like Trajan's did in Rome. And then we also see a temple as part of it as well. So sort of standard forum characteristics, but exported to the provinces. There are a few kind of more interesting things about it. So we see a basilica, and we'll talk about that in a second. But also just the porticos surrounding the forum. So that's going to be these kind of porches that surround this open space here on the columns. So you can kind of see them. This is the open space, and there's kind of going to be a colonnade or a portico around it. And we see them looking a little bit more in the Eastern style, in the ornate style, looking a little bit more provincial. So the columns of the portico have different capitals. They have more of an Eastern Greek capital that we see sometimes in Asia Minor. It's kind of hard to see in that image, and not all of them survive super well. But they're also not going to have a flat top. They're going to have more of an arched top. And that's something also that we see in the Eastern provinces, similar to their arches. They're arches that are not flat topped. They have the arch or the pediment above it. Similar things, so that the portico would look more arched here. And then lastly, we also see some artwork from here that looks very flat and frontal. But if we look a little bit more at the basilica, so that double apsed basilica, so this is looking one direction, and then that's looking in the other direction. So we can see there's a rounded apse and there's a rounded apse. And you can also see the Corinthian style columns that would have lined the interior of it, and the columns that go really all the way around. So the basilica itself has elements of the sort of Syrian or ornate architectural style. We see a lot of receding and projecting elements on the walls. So we see niches for statues, sort of all that dimension that we've seen in the Eastern provinces, where there's, if you think back to Petra or something, where there's sort of alternating columns with niches for statues. So just lots of changes in depth as we kind of walk around this building or on the inside of this building. So although it is a work of Trajan, or similar to the work of Trajan, Severus is kind of also hinting at his roots in the provinces and not directly copying Trajan's work in Rome. We also see some pilasters. They have kind of natural imagery. We also see scenes from myth, including Hercules, Dionysus, who were closely connected to this family. Those were also two very popular cults at this time, so kind of makes sense. And it all kind of actually really mimics stuff that we see in Asia Minor, so much so that some of the art historians have theorized that it was actually the same builders, that maybe perhaps the same builders actually came from Asia Minor to do this work, perhaps people that, were well known in the empire or something, because it's so similar to some works that we see in Asia Minor. So a very provincial basilica, but also does bear some similarities to Trajan's in Rome. Here is some of the relief sculpture that we see from the Severan Basilica. And so what we see here are some depictions of Hercules and the Nemean lion. So we can see Hercules here, and then there's sort of a lion figure in a way, not very well rendered or well preserved. But if it was painted, you might be able to tell more. So we have Hercules slaying the Nemean lion, which we've talked about was one of his first labors, and that's where he gets that lion headdress that he wears, that Commodus wore, and trying to connect himself to Hercules. We also see some natural imagery, as I said, so there you can see those vines that I was talking about. They kind of fill in the space. We also see, what was the other one? Oh, centaurs as well. So you can see that here. Perhaps it's the Centauromachi, which is the battle between the centaurs and the humans. It's a very old Greek myth. But some maybe reference to some kind of mythical stories here that we see. See, this is he has the body of a man and then the legs of a horse. So he's got hooves there, there's a hoof, and then there's his body. So that's a centaur. And you can see that he's fighting with a human man. So probably some depiction of the Centauromachi, or the war between the centaurs and the humans from myth. This is the Severan Arch. So if we are continuing on in the city, we have a triumphal arch that was built by Severus in Lepsis Magna. It is a tetrapylon, so that literally means 4 gates. So tetra is 4, and pylon means gates or gate. And that is a cube-shaped monument with an arch or gate on each side, usually situated over a crossroads. So if you have two roads that are meeting, you can put this tetrapylon on it, and it sort of creates a crossroads there, sort of like a stoplight in an intersection, right? But this is just a more decorative feature. So tetrapylon, we see those a lot in the provinces as well. And maybe we've even looked at some, but I'm not sure if we've actually mentioned that term of what it is. So tetrapylon is this triumphal arch, a type of triumphal arch. We see a very broken pediment. So right here you can see it's a really exaggerated, like there's just these little triangles. So a very exaggerated broken pediment, which is we've talked about, that's an Eastern characteristic. We see some ornate detailing here in these pilasters, and so it's a bit more ornate than something you might see in Rome. And when we have such detail to that degree, also a little bit more Eastern. But we do see some Roman references as well, so the fact that there are these Corinthian columns. But other than that, looks very Syrian or Eastern. And there's really a lot of images of triumph on it, though. And this was actually used in a triumph for the Severans. So the Severans actually had a triumph, had the actual event, sort of this parade, in Leptis Magna, and that was the first time that a triumph had been held outside of the city of Rome. That was something that was an event that was very closely connected to the city of Rome, because it was a way to express victory over a foreign place, and it was a way for the hometown to celebrate, right? We've talked about the similarities between that and like sports teams after the Super Bowl. If the Buccaneers are going to win the Super Bowl, they're not going to go to some random city and have a triumph. That doesn't really make sense. But they might go to Tom Brady's hometown, I guess. And so that's kind of what we're seeing here. We're seeing Septimius Severus go back to his hometown and kind of have a triumph as the hometown boy who's had some great success. So a bit of a change there, a bigger emphasis on the provinces for sure. We also see lots of relief panels that feature the Severan family participating in events that reinforce their power. So things like a triumph. So we see a depiction of a triumph on this, processions, sacrifices, sort of this references to harmony. So harmony among the family, among the rulers. You'll remember that Septimius Severus and his son Caracalla are technically co-rulers, although Septimius Severus kind of has the power. But there's this connection there that they want to create this dynasty. And so we're creating harmony within the family in order to show that there's going to be a peaceful succession, and that the power is going to be passed to Caracalla after Severus's death. But yes, lots of images of the family, not just Septimius Severus. We see him sharing a triumphal chariot with Caracalla and Geta, both sons. And then we also see a sort of setting of the scene. So the fact that we have all of these events taking place with the family, we can actually see that the lighthouse from the harbor is depicted on the arch. And I'm not sure if it's in this picture here. It's hard to see. Couldn't find a lot of good pictures for this arch, unfortunately. But we do see somewhere, I don't think it's in there, a depiction of the lighthouse. So the lighthouse at Leptis Magna, so it's a depiction of that. And so we're setting the scene that this is an arch that was used in a triumph in Leptis Magna, but it's also a depiction of events that are happening in Leptis Magna with the imperial family, if that makes sense. So lots of connections there. The lighthouse is kind of going to set the scene, as I said, and then it's going to also mimic the events that are taking place in real life. So we have a triumph on the arch and a triumph in real life. We also see some images of captives, Parthian captives. As I said, Severus was conducting military campaigns in Parthia, and overall just a big expression of triumph, of victory, very closely connected to the whole family and to their roots in the provinces. This is going to contrast with the arch of Septimius Severus in the Roman Forum. So if we move now from the provinces, from Septimius's hometown, where he's sort of a hometown hero, he's also going to build things in Rome to reinforce his power, to legitimize his power. And this is going to be his arch that he builds in the Roman Forum. So I feel like we haven't been in the Roman Forum in a while. It's grown quite a bit since we have been gone. So you can see that we've filled in all of our different forums here: Trajan, Augustus, Nerva, Vespasian, the Roman Forum, there's Caesar's, and then we're going to see some other monuments built by other emperors. But the Arch of Septimius Severus, so we can see that here at number 25, which is right there. And it's going to also face Augustus's arch. So it's kind of, the two of them are both on these two sides of this sort of open space, the open space of the forum, which is where most people would congregate. So we have the Arch of Septimius Severus built on one end facing the Arch of Augustus. So the two are kind of mirroring each other. And so we see Severus kind of connecting himself to Augustus. You know, if Augustus is one side of the coin, Severus is the other. So we're blocking that area off. If we look a little bit more closely at it, though, we will see a marked departure from the styles of Augustus. So it doesn't look very classical. We know that Augustus loved the classical period. This is going to look much more abstracted. We can also call that italic, because if classical came from Greece, what we're seeing is a bit more of italic influence, of more Italian. Italian we use kind of to refer to the modern nation. If something's Italian, it's going to be from Italy, like the country. But if something's italic, we can talk about that more as the region, the peninsula of Italy. So there's a bit of a departure there. We say things are italic, not Italian, when we're talking about a time that the country didn't exist. Anyway, when we see these forms, these are going to be, because they're not classical, they are actually more referencing things that we've seen in the peninsula of Italy, even before the Romans. And so we've talked about multiple ground lines. That was something that we've seen in the past. And so we see that again here. There's different rows of people standing on different ground lines. And there's just so many figures also that they're kind of just all over the place. We see these different scenes taking place, but also kind of trying to create depth maybe, and not doing a super realistic job at that, but kind of just placing them above each other. This is a three-bayed arch, as we see. So we've seen those kind of getting bigger and bigger. We saw a few in the provinces, and this is the first that we see in Rome. But yeah, the sculptural decoration is just kind of a mess. As I said, it's all over the place. We have images of war and campaigns against the Parthians in the east. So again, referencing the battles that Severus did against the Parthians, his victories there, right? So we see the siege of a city. Again, we're trying to create some sense of depth with the different ground lines and so many different figures. Just the sheer number of figures are they're trying to create a crowded scene with a lot of people. It's almost like they took a spiral column, like the column of Trajan or something, and flattened it. So it's like if that would have normally been spiraling around a column, instead it's been flattened into one panel. So kind of trying to make it all fit here. But everyone's really crammed. We do see Parthians with their caps, right? So we see them bound as prisoners, as I said, a reference to Severus's victory in Parthia. Something else I wanted to mention, this would have been a flat-topped arch, as you can see, and so it would have had some kind of sculptural group on top, perhaps a chariot with horses, probably made of bronze, and so that's probably why it doesn't exist today, because it would have been melted down. But you can see it on coins that we have. So again, triumphal imagery, right, with a chariot. That's what an emperor would have ridden into the city during the actual event of the triumph, and so we see that on the triumphal arch. Yes, depictions of the Parthians here. And just to kind of, again, to compare, so we do see more of a classical style on the column of Trajan, as we've talked about. And then when we went to the column of Marcus Aurelius, we started to see this more abstracted, chaotic, and also more gruesome scenes. But that's more what we're seeing in the Arch of Septimius Severus. So again, we have multiple ground lines. We have people doing different things. It's almost like it's trying to be a column, but instead it's just flat. Scenes of battle, scenes of sieging cities, similar imagery that we're really taking you to the heart of the battle. We're showing you how hard this battle was, and how hard fought this victory was. So if we compare also, we can look at the column, or the pedestal of the column of Antoninus Pius. And this was the more abstracted side compared to the classical side, right? And so this is where they're trying to show depth. They're trying to show like a circular scene, but they've done that by taking the circular scene and just like moving it into different rows. So an attempt at depth here, sort of similar to what we're seeing with kind of making figures behind each other, but really just above each other. Similar conventions here. And then if we do compare it, as I said, to the Severan arch in Leptis Magnus, or Magna, also a note about the name, sorry, this is kind of chaotic. Sometimes you'll see it with a C and sometimes you'll see it with a T. Either way is fine, it's the same place, it's just been spelled differently over the years. Anyway, if we compare the arch of Severus in the Roman Forum to the arch in Leptis Magna, we see a bit of a change in that, well, first of all, these are both triumphal arches, but one's a tetrapylon, one is a three-bayed arch, a little bit more traditional. But the artwork itself, we're seeing similar imagery. So we're seeing both victories over the Parthians. We're seeing an attempt for Severus to try to win favor with the people. We've seen this a lot in the past. If you looked at, Vespasian or the Flavians at all, really, with their victory over the Jews. Augustus taking the standard back from the Parthians, also his conquest over Egypt. The best way, it seems, to win favor with people in Rome is to show how you have defeated non-Romans. So that's what we're seeing here again with his real attempt at legitimacy, at currying favor with the people, and he's doing so with scenes of victory in both. But in the Arch of Septimius Severus, we're actually seeing a little bit less developed forms. So we're seeing a little bit more chaotic, a little bit more messy, if we're being honest. It's not as clean artwork. It's a bit more chaotic, as I said. And the Severan arch in Leptis Magna is done a little bit cleaner, a little bit more neat. And so it's a departure, because in the past we've really seen the metropole as the driver of stylistic change, as the pinnacle of art in the empire. It usually starts in Rome and then it has been exported elsewhere. And as we saw with a lot of depictions of emperors in their portraiture, we saw that the portraits that we see in the East or in the provinces are often a little bit less developed than the ones in Rome, that there's a little bit more or less maybe naturalism to them. Their faces look a little bit funkier. They're just not quite done as well, if we're being honest. And what we see here is a bit of a flip in that Leptis Magna has a little bit more developed style than the Arch of Septimius Severus. So as I've said before, that's, I've said this a lot in this lecture, but the emphasis on the provinces when we have an emperor from the provinces, and that Rome is sort of not the pinnacle necessarily right now. So a bit of a change. Another thing that we see in Rome, though, is the Arch of the Argentarii. This is not a work of the empire. So this was not an imperial commission, as the Arch of Septimius Severus was. That was put up by the Severans. This is going to be a private commission. The Argentarii are actually bankers. That's what that word means. They're a group of bankers, and they put this up for in honor of the imperial family, which we know from an inscription. And we're not really sure why they did this. We're not sure if they were kind of just trying to get favor with the royal family, if the family actually did something for them, and so this was a thank you. We don't know. The inscription doesn't say. It just says that it was commissioned by these bankers in honor of the imperial family. So don't know. But we see imperial imagery on this private commission. So we're seeing depictions of the imperial family on something that is not put up by the emperor. It's actually a doorway that leads into a private area. And so it's really not associated with anything public or imperial. We do see some images of Hercules as well. Still, that emphasis on him in a time that the cult was big and the time that the emperors were trying to connect themselves to him. So we see some images of Hercules. And then we also see images of the royal family, as I said. And so you'll see that here. This is Severus and Julia Domna, and they are conducting a sacrifice, essentially. So this is a scene of them making a sacrifice to the gods. You can see that they're both wearing veils over their heads, so a sign of piety. This here is a religious symbol as well. And then we have them sort of burning something in order to make the sacrifice. And then down here, we have a scene of a bull sacrifice, which was a very common scene, especially associations with Mithras. That was always a scene associated with that god, the sacrifice of a bull, but also just a way to pay honor to the gods. We also see some kind of floating weapons here, scenes of military might of power, shields and a helmet. So sort of some reference to the military might of Septimius Severus and their family. If we look a little bit closer at their portraits, so Julia Domna is actually a little bit bigger than Septimius Severus, and this rather than uh, showing hierarchy of scale. So in the past, just when someone's bigger, that often means that they're more important. Rather than that, I think this is an attempt to show depth and an attempt to put her behind him, but you can still see her. So she's kind of a little bit behind him, but a little bit taller so that she doesn't fade into the background. Their sons also would have been depicted on this arch as well. And so perhaps she needs to be bigger because the two sons are going to be in front of her. And so we have, the way that her dress kind of just fades into nothingness. There likely would have been their sons down here. And so we are seeing that she needs to be taller in order to allow room for them. It's a very kind of flat portrait, even though it is in relief and it's not done in super shallow relief. More just stylistically, it feels a little bit flat, so it's very frontal. The figures are looking out at the viewer. They're not looking at each other. They're not engaging with each other here, but they're both looking out at the viewer. So there's less engagement with each other and more engagement with the viewer, making it very frontal, very frontally oriented, and also a little bit more flat too. So there's not a lot of dimension or a lot going on. It sort of feels a little bit more static. And then also, if we look at their outfits, as I said, Septimius Severus has the veil to show piety, but Julia Domna is also wearing a tiara as well. And we see that is a connection to her royalty, but also we only see the two of them in this scene. And a lot of times when we've seen sacrifice scenes in the past with the emperor, usually the emperor will be there, but someone else is making the sacrifice and he's kind of overseeing it. There's usually a large group of people. And so here we just see the two of them. And as I've said, this was kind of a way to separate themselves from common Romans. They didn't want to be depicted with just the common people. They kind of saw themselves as a little bit elevated, a little bit more royal. So she's going to wear the tiara and they don't want anyone else in the scene with them. It's just going to be the two of them with their children. The royal family is going to be kind of separated in a class apart from the rest of the common people. So we see that here, and a little bit more, as I said, some italic conventions also in the flatness and the frontality of it. So that is the Arch of the Argentarii. If we move now to Caracalla. So Caracalla is going to be the son of Septimius, as I said, and they actually ruled together for about 13 years. But Septimius Severus was kind of the main ruler in that time, but he is going to die naturally in 211. So as I said, he's the only emperor that dies naturally in the 3rd century, and he's also the first one to die in the 3rd century. So the rest of it's all downhill from here, basically. But Caracalla is going to take power, and when he takes power, he is actually going to take power with his younger brother. So they're going to maintain that idea of having two rulers at the same time. So we have Septimius and Caracalla, and then we're going to have Caracalla and Geta. However, that does not last very long. So I believe it's the same year, 211. I think Septimius dies in the earlier part of the year, and in December of that year, Caracalla is going to kill his younger brother. He's going to kill Geta and take power for himself. And there is actually thought that he perhaps had his mother's help in doing so, and that this was their plot to make Caracalla the sole ruler. Caracalla and Geta never really got along. They were always at odds with one another, and so it was kind of inevitable that something was going to happen, that they would not be ruling together for a long time because it was just unsustainable. But unfortunately, Caracalla does assassinate Geta and takes power for himself. When he does that, he declares the damnatio memoriae of Geta. So all of Geta's images are destroyed or hacked off or whatever. So this is a rare coin that we have of Geta. He looks quite young there, so you can imagine that at this time, that was prior to this, when his image was still being circulated, and so we do have a rare coin and a couple of other portraits where he looks pretty young, where he was still a kid. That probably was not affected. But Caracalla, as the sole ruler, rules from 198 to 217, but really by himself from 211 to 217. And he had a reputation for being very cruel. So this is a military family. His father was a soldier who gained power after a civil war, and Caracalla is going to adopt those same tendencies. I mean, he kills his own brother. He's more soldier than emperor, so he wasn't brought up to be a political ruler. He was really brought up to be a soldier and a general. And we can see that in his portraiture. So if you look at this one from the Met, he looks kind of intense. Like he's got the furrowed brow. You can see these deep lines in his forehead here that are really creating this like triangle, this V. So there's kind of like a feeling of anger, or he's angry. He looks very tough. He has these very deep eyes, and so his brow really extends over the eyes, which makes him look like a little bit kind of mysterious maybe, or kind of like you don't know what he's thinking. He's kind of hiding something. The way that his mouth also is kind of just pursed, and he's looking off to the side, which just kind of seems a little bit distrustful. His head is actually turned, so it's hard to see, but his neck is kind of turned and he's kind of looking back. And that also is kind of like he's on guard, right? He's kind of watching you. He's like looking around at his surroundings. He's not very calm or settled, like such a marked difference than we've seen from like Marcus Aurelius, or the philosopher emperors who were all about like calmness, inner calm, just like do the right thing, just like all about virtue. We see such a change here with Caracalla, and that he's really very militaristic. He had a reputation, as I said, for being cruel, and his portraiture, he's going to look very intense. He just looks mean, honestly. He looks like he's ready to fight. So as I said, he is going to damn his brother's memory after he kills him. And so in some of the things that we've already seen, that has happened. So in this portrait from Egypt, the two boys would have been here, but he had Geta's face hacked off. So Geta no longer exists in the family. Sorry, Geta, you're out. Caracalla still exists here as a child, but we don't see Geta. And then, as I said here, so the boys would have both been depicted, and I was trying to see if Caracalla is still there, but I don't see him. But I know that this was an instance of Geta being removed from it, and I think maybe Caracalla's was erased later. So this is definitely, you can see this kind of open space where Geta would have been. We have it even on coinage. So even on coins, he was hacked off. Like there's kind of this awkward gap where Geta would have been. Here's Caracalla. And then his brother would have been next to him, probably facing each other, but not anymore. And then we also see it on inscriptions. So the part about Geta has just kind of like been rubbed out, and it's all neat. And then you have the part about Geta. So it's a little bit awkward sometimes. But yes, Caracalla really did not like his brother, kills his brother, erases him from history, and takes power for himself. One of the biggest things, though, that Caracalla builds and that really influences the layout of Rome, and really some remains that we still have to this day, are the baths of Caracalla. So the baths of Caracalla, built from 212 to 216, are a huge bath complex in Rome. It's just massive. If you look at the plan of it, so it's this great large space that would have been enclosed. So there's a wall that goes around it, and then all this open space would have been gardens and nature, and then this in the middle would have been the bath complex. So if we look at that a little bit closer, we do see the hallmarks of Roman baths. So we see things like a frigidarium, a tepidarium, a caldarium, these different kind of cold, warm, and hot rooms, right? We've talked about that. And the way that you progress through them. So there's this journey that you're kind of being forced to take in a way. There's sort of a prescribed way of doing things. A palestra, right? That's the kind of the workout area. And then we have gardens around it. But this wasn't just a bath complex, essentially. There were baths in it, like you see in that central area, but it was really meant to be a social hub, a place to hang out, be social. There were all kinds of things. Let's see. So libraries, recital halls for music and poetry readings. There was a large emphasis on the arts. So like poetry and music. So we see separate chambers where those things would take place. So it's not just athletic activity. It's not just bathing or exercising, but we also see an emphasis on the arts. Sort of the idea here is that if there's actually a Latin expression, mens sana in corpore sano, a sound mind and a sound body. So this is a complex to work both things. You're not just working out your body, but you're also working out your mind, and you're kind of bettering yourself in all ways. That if your body is well, then your mind will be well. We also see a huge just variety of climate rooms, so the hot, warm, and cold, but all different kinds of temperatures also in between, and humidity levels are different. It was a really climate-controlled building. Lots of engineering went into that to make this building with all these different rooms. It was just very lavish, so lots of marble floors, marble wall panels. It was concrete. So this was a concrete space faced with brick-faced concrete. And that probably makes sense because we see a lot of domes here. We see a lot of large vaulted spaces, really lavishly done, cross vaults, barrel vaults, all of these things, domes as well. So a really lavish building, a building for the people. So this wasn't private. It would have been a public space. It's not just for Caracalla. A place for kind of everyone to enjoy. And as I think we've mentioned with baths, also they were open to all social classes. So this was kind of the great equalizer in Rome, in that everyone would go to the baths. Everyone would use them, from slave to elite. Every class of society would go, and we've talked about there maybe would be different rooms for men and women, especially in things where it's kind of like a sauna, but really a public space of enjoyment. And here's kind of another look at it. So you can see those gardens that would have stood around it. It would have been walled, and then we have the central bath complex with these domed rooms. And we see a few more off to the sides as well. Actually, maybe that's where the kind of reading rooms are. I'm not sure. Open spaces too. Here are the remains today. So really great remains. I didn't get a chance to go when I was in Rome, but I'm really hoping to go back someday. It is along the Via Appia, so it's not quite in the middle of Rome. The Via Appia was one of those roads that led out of Rome, out of the center of Rome. So it's set a little bit apart from the city. But yes, great remains today, and there's the height and the arches, the domes that we still see. This work of concrete, really just lavish and over the top and large. So there's been some work to reconstruct the baths, what they would have looked like. And so there's a few images that I have for you of where they've spliced it together with the modern remains. It's a little bit blurry, but you can see that here's what it looks like today, just that brick-faced concrete, but it probably would have been also covered with marble. So marble revetment on the walls, and then marble on the floors as well, kind of similar to maybe the Pantheon. We saw those marble floors. Niches or arches for statues, archways as well. You can kind of see how that connects here in the back, varying levels of arches also. Here's probably some kind of pool or fountain. You can see that there's this rounded space that's a little bit sunken, and so probably some kind of water basin. And then maybe a statue would have stood here as well. Really just a huge, lavish complex. A big kind of center in Rome. Underneath, we also see lots of a huge tunnelway system, essentially a huge connection of tunnels, and much of it was for the maintenance of the baths. So that's probably where slaves or workers would be, toiling over the hypocaust system, making sure that the rooms are staying heated. We see this just vast network underneath. But something else that we see underneath that is not really related to the infrastructure is a mithraeum. So a mithraeum is a center of worship for the god Mithras, for the cult of Mithras. So in the Mithras mythology, it's kind of a tongue twister, Mithras was very closely connected to caves. So all of the mithraeums that we see in the empire always are either natural caves or man-made caves. And so that's kind of what we're seeing here in this underground space. It's the attempt to make a cave type worship space for Mithras. And there's a few ways that we know of this. One is the artwork that we see. So this is a depiction of Mithras. His face has been hacked off, probably done in later centuries by Christians who were trying to erase pagan worship in the city. So his face was probably hacked off, but you can still kind of see his Phrygian cap. It's hard to see in this picture. And it's not in very good condition either, but this is a depiction of Mithras. And then there was also a sort of spot for sacrifices as well. We see like an altar kind of area for sacrifices. I mentioned earlier that Mithras is very closely associated with the sacrifice of a bull. So perhaps that would have taken place in this space. Possible also that it could have been even an initiation space like we saw at the Villa of the Mysteries. Maybe this was, as the kind of main worship center, perhaps this was where initiates became full members of the cult of Mithras, all kind of done in this underground vaulted space, right? We can see these maybe groin vaults, it looks like, with an oculus. So kind of also part of the baths of Caracalla, but their own space. So just like lots of different things going on at this complex. It's a gym, it's for the arts, it's a social gathering space, it's a religious space in some way, so a really large complex. We also see some great sculpture that comes out of the baths of Caracalla. And so this is the Farnese group, and this particular sculpture is the Farnese bull, and it is actually the largest single sculpture that we have from antiquity. So it's all connected. Everything on this is connected. And so the largest stature group essentially that exists from the Roman world, in the sense that it's not carved probably all from one piece of marble, but it's one scene. Everything is all part of it. It's each other. So it's a statue group. So the largest statue group that we have from antiquity. So this sculpture group represents the myth of Dirce and Antiope. So Antiope was a woman who was impregnated by Zeus, and she fled to her aunt, Antiope. But Antiope hated her, treated her really, really poorly. And so she eventually had to escape from her aunt as well. But later on in life, the children that she has with Zeus are these twins, and they find out about the torture essentially that Dirce put Antiope, their mother, through. And as punishment, they tie her to a wild bull as a punishment for her crimes in a way. And she is supposed to be dragged to death down a mountain by this bull. So a very kind of violent scene here. I've kind of simplified the myth for you, but that's the basics of it. And so what we see here are the two sons, so the two men here, and they are trying to control this wild bull so that they can tie it to Dirce here. And you can kind of see that there might even be like a neck or a rope around her neck. And she is topless, and then she has just sort of a little bit actually more classical drapery, although it's not as sort of elegantly rendered as we've seen in the past. It's a little bit more striated. It's kind of just these lines that we see on the bottom, very like straight. But we see her being tied to this wild bull. And this is definitely a Hellenistic work, so it's probably a copy of a 2nd century BC original. We don't actually have an original from that time, but we're kind of trying to date it by that. So it's likely a Roman copy of a Greek original. Down in the Hellenistic style, we could just see the kind of drama that's taking place here, the movement and the complexity of the scene. We even have a dog here kind of looking up. We have other maybe nymphs or something watching the scene, lots of dynamic movement, the facial expressions as well. He's kind of grimacing as he's trying to control this bull, and she's trying to kind of prevent maybe the hoof from coming on her face. So a very dynamic scene that we see here, and also a very, as I said, a large sculpture group and a very lavishly done sculpture. And perhaps, where else would you put this other than a very lavish space like the Baths of Caracalla? So it makes sense that we find these there. Just to show you some other sculptural groups that we've seen. So the Laocoon and then Scylla, these again, Hellenistic works. These were both Roman copies of Hellenistic originals. And again, just the dynamic nature of the scene, and also kind of the gruesome nature of the scene, that all 3 of these are depicting kind of gruesome things. A woman being tied to a bull, men being like wrapped by a snake, attacked by a snake, and then these dogs who are attacking the men of Odysseus. So kind of graphic scenes that we're seeing here, and all done in high emotion, high movement, and lots of dynamic movement, and just a lot of complexity to the sculptural group. Another one that we see is the Farnese Hercules. So this is also from the Baths of Caracalla. Farnese refers to the man later on in history and maybe the Renaissance or so who found these sculptures and owned them and was going to actually put them up in his own palace. So Farnese refers to kind of that man and all of the ones that he found at the Baths of Caracalla. So the Farnese Hercules, we see him here, also a very Hellenistic inspired statue. It's probably the original is probably from 320 BC, and then the I don't think I put the date there, but the Roman version is from around the time of the Baths of Caracalla, so around 216. But what do we see here? So Hercules is looking really ripped. Like, this man is jacked. His muscles are like exaggerated, super huge. You know, we had idealism in the classical sculpture, but this has been taken to like a whole other level in that it's hyper realized, it's hyper idealized, it's super over the top, you know. So this is Hercules. He is also depicted with the beard and curly hair, so kind of similar stylistic conventions to as we've seen in this time period. He is leaning on his club, which we mentioned is a characteristic of his, and then draped over maybe that club, or also maybe like a tree stump that he's leaning on, is the Nemean lion. So you can see that here, the pelt of the lion. He's not wearing it at the moment, it's kind of hung up. But it's hung next to him, and then there's that club with the kind of spiky parts. And just to remind you, we saw this also on the portrait bust of Commodus. When he's dressed up as Hercules, we see him wearing the Nemean lion with the club also. And then if we also look at the back of it, so this is really a sculpture in the round. It can be viewed from all angles. You have a 360-degree view. And just to go back, you know, that's sort of a similar thing that we're seeing here, that as you walk around the sculpture, especially here, you're seeing different parts of the story. You're seeing it in different ways. And so this not so much, but if we do look closely, he has something in his hand here, and those are the apples of the Hesperides. And that is another labor of his. So we've talked about all these labors, these different adventures that Hercules goes on, one of which is the Nemean lion, and another one which is the apples of the Hesperides. He is tasked to go get these apples from a garden where the daughters of a Titan live. And so he has to kind of persuade them to give him these apples. So that's what he's holding in his hand behind his back. So there's, again, that idea of a total in the round sculpture. You can view it from every angle. And we also see that in the portrait of Commodus. He's holding the apples as well. So these hallmarks of Herculean iconography, right? The iconography of Hercules, the pelt of the lion, the club, the apples. And we also just always see him looking pretty muscular and pretty strong, pretty heroic. I wanted to compare also, so as I said, this is a Hellenistic sculpture. So it's the Romans looking back at the Hellenistic world and copying. And we see some similarities here with the Terme boxer, which is a very famous work of Hellenistic art. This is also a bronze. It's got a long date range, so we're not sure exactly when it's from, but it's definitely Hellenistic in style, and we really see similarities. We see the beard and the curly hair in both. We see this like over exaggerated musculature, so these just massive hulking muscles, and the six-pack and everything, this sort of heroic figure, but we also see some more emotion in the Terme boxer, which is really what it's known for, this kind of anguished expression on the boxer's face. But Hercules kind of has a sense of that too, that maybe he's resting, he's kind of got a lean, and he's looking off to the side. Maybe this is even, you know, after he has received the apples, and so he's kind of resting, something like that. Or kind of catching him at maybe part of his story. And then also, just one more thing to note about this, that's right, is that because we're seeing it connected with Caracalla, there's sort of an imperial reference here, in that we saw Commodus connecting himself to Hercules, but we've seen a lot of Herculean imagery on Severan artwork, and that is especially because Caracalla really liked Hercules and was kind of interested in that cult, interested in connecting himself to Hercules as that hero, and so makes sense that we might find a depiction of Hercules at the Baths of Caracalla. Something else that we find, another Farnese work, is the Farnese Caracalla. So this is a portrait of the emperor that we found in the baths. And he looks very similar. Again, he kind of has that suspicious look on his face. He looks a little bit mean. He's got that really like triangular in his like shape in his forehead that makes him look like his brow is furrowed. And it's interesting because it kind of mimics his nasolabial lines. So it almost creates like an X on his face. Or just sort of an two inverted triangles maybe. So an interesting kind of play with line there in order to give his face this sort of expression, his furrowed brow, and he's looking off to the side. Again, his neck is kind of twisted as though he is looking at an enemy. He's looking over his shoulder all the time. He's always worried, right? And looking very strong, very kind of aggressive or mean a little bit here. Doesn't have that calmness of former emperors. Caracalla is going to be assassinated. He is assassinated in the year 217, and Macrinus, who was part of the conspiracy to assassinate him, is going to take over. So he's kind of part of a group of people who wanted him assassinated, and then he's elected emperor after Caracalla. So he, I don't believe, is directly related to the Severans, but he only rules for about a year, and then after that, he is assassinated. And so after Macrinus is assassinated, the role of emperor is going to be given to Elagabalus, who is a member of the Severan family. So he is the grandnephew of Julia Domna. So it's through her side of the family, her sister's grandson. That would be right. Yeah. And he's really young. He's like 14 when he comes into power. But again, we're really hanging on to this idea of family succession, dynastic succession. So you can see that he looks very young in his portraiture. He does kind of have some like facial hair, like a little bit of a mustache maybe, but not the full beard that the other ones had because he's quite young. And he's only going to rule for 4 years. He was really known for his social deviance in his time as emperor. If we think back to Nero, who was another teenage emperor, we kind of see similarities in that they were big partiers. They kind of, or Elagabalus especially, didn't have much respect for Roman religion. So he kind of went against the religion and the norms in some ways. Was also known for his sexual activity, his large groups of women and friends who he would often hang out with. So just kind of a party emperor, not super interested in ruling, much more interested in partying, as I said. So he is going to be actually murdered at the age of 18. So he doesn't rule for very long and he doesn't live very long. And so, as I said, all of the portraits that we see of him, he looks quite young. When he dies, the throne is going to be turned over to his cousin, who is another grandnephew to Julia Domna. So again, we're keeping it in the family. He is also related to the Severans. He even has the name Severus. So he's really being connected to the Severan dynasty here, the family. He's going to rule for actually a good amount of time, 222 to 235. I think he was also pretty young when he took power, but he's actually a fairly stable ruler. So after Elagabalus, who was kind of crazy, and then the man before him who took power kind of in a coup, we have a little bit a return to stability. He also, like the Severans, Septimius and Caracalla, had to deal with a sort of unruly Praetorian Guard who was really getting confident about their power, the way that they could influence the emperor and the power and influence they could have over him. So he had to deal a lot with that. He had to kind of make a lot of concessions and always try to keep them happy. But unfortunately, he is also assassinated while on a military campaign. And so it's thought that there was some kind of animosity between him and the military. And when he dies after this kind of stable period, it's going to signal the end of the Severan dynasty. So he is the last Severan. And we're going to get into something called the 3rd century crisis. And this is essentially another kind of civil war period, a time when the role of emperor is up for grabs, and lots of people are going to try to grab it, and they're going to do so in lots of violent ways. So not a super stable time of Rome coming up. And as I said, the Severans are this last family dynasty that we have. So they're the last dynasty of Rome proper that is connected by family ties and that has this dynastic family succession. We're going to see a bit of a change in rulership, in the structure of rulership also, as we get into the 3rd century crisis and its aftermath, and that we're going to start seeing more people being added to the role of emperor. We're going to start seeing lots and lots of co-emperors. So a bit of a change there. If we do just look at Alexander's portraiture for a second, So we actually do see a little bit more classical look here. He looks very calm, which is really in contrast to people like Caracalla, who always looked like ready to fight. So Alexander Severus is going to look a little bit more calm, perhaps after this power grab or the coup where Caracalla was assassinated and now Elagabalus has been assassinated. He's trying to impose some kind of stability and some sort of calmness in the empire, which we actually see reflected in his reign, which was a fairly stable time. We also see, though, some similarities. We have similar drilled eyes and chiseled kind of hair. So the hair has detailing that's been a little bit more drilled, like the eyes is a little bit more detailed, like we see in this time. We also do see, though, that his eyes are kind of glancing to the side. And so he's kind of looking off into this direction. He's not looking up. He's not very pious and just calm and in touch with the gods. He, like Caracalla, is kind of looking off to the side as if he is watching out for possible enemies. And probably, as I said, for good reason. So with his assassination, we're ending the Severan dynasty, and then next time we will be talking about the 3rd century crisis and really starting to get into more late antique art. So that's it for now, and I'll see you next time.